So glad there's so many people that have been able to join us. Obviously, this is a hot topic, and Rohit is an excellent person to help us and guide us through this. So Rohit is the founder and president of DoGood Fundraising. He's a University of Toronto graduate. He has been very active in the nonprofit sector for 16 years, and most of that primarily in Peel. He was appointed to a 5-year term with the grant review team of the Ontario Trillium Foundation and served a 2-year term with the Grants Review Committee for the Ministry of Children and Youth Services on the Youth Opportunities Fund. So Rohit comes with a lot of knowledge. He has reviewed and assessed over 300 applications, so he really knows how to point people into the right direction, and he has helped to distribute over 60 million in funding to community-based nonprofits, charities, and even grassroots groups. So he brings an additional 5 years of frontline experience working in fundraising roles with several nonprofit organizations in Peel, and he has spent over a decade volunteering as a board member, and he used to be one of our board members, and he has been a true leader in the sector. So welcome, Rohit, and please take it away.
Thanks very much, Corinne. Can everyone see the slide there?
Yes, we can, Rohit.
Perfect. So I'm just going to get into the Community Building Fund today, and this is the new grant that was announced by the government. And so a little bit about us as a business and what we do to support you as volunteer MBC members and organizations. We provide all-inclusive grant writing services where we write grants from start to finish. We do prospect research where we help you find grants, and we do professional development training. So please do reach out to Volunteer MBC if you need any of these types of supports. And of course, we don't pretend to be affiliated with the government. We're not, but we are presenting this information today, to everyone for free, just to make sure that you have it and it's accessible. So what you can expect in this brief presentation is we'll talk about the grant itself and eligibility. We'll look at some key sections in the grant. You'll have a chance to just see what do you need to know to develop a good proposal, and then I'll take any questions at the end. And what's our time frame today? How much time do we have, guys?
We have till 1 o'clock, but we would want to finish up a little bit prior to that, so we have some time for the questions plus a little bit of wrap-up updates.
Thank you so much. So in terms of grant overview and eligibility, let's start there. The Community Building Fund is part of the provincial government's investment of funds to really support arts, culture, heritage, tourism, sport, and recreation. So these groups are all very important. If you identify with these groups, then this fund may be for your organization. And it's really about groups that are experiencing significant financial pressures, specifically due to the pandemic, due to COVID-19. And so it's a direct response from the government to all the challenges that are going on, and the fact that the sector is really seeing very little revenue due to restrictions. So there are 2 streams of funding, and today we'll be focusing on the operating because that is the only stream that's actually known to the public right now. We don't know anything about the capital stream. We don't know when it's to be announced, how much money, what is the process. And so we'll have to stay tuned for capital. But today we'll talk operating. So operating stream has $55 million that will be distributed to nonprofits this year and Indigenous communities. And I mentioned all these different organizations: arts, culture, heritage, tourism, sport, and recreation. That's really the population that's going to be receiving these grants. And once again, it's meant to help you sustain and support your operations. There's also this idea of creating new attractions and experiences virtually in many cases, but the government is supporting organizations like yours to put on these different initiatives with this grant and to support operations, which is incredible. It's very rare these days. You don't see a lot of operating grants, so this is pretty great. Now, in terms of eligibility, you have to have a significant presence in arts and culture or heritage, tourism, sport, or recreation. So it has to be in one of those areas. And you have to operate facilities in Ontario, of course, and deliver experiences in Ontario because it's the provincial government funding it. right? So you must be either a registered charity or a nonprofit or an Indigenous group. So if you have questions about eligibility specifically, let's say your organization operates a little differently, please do reach out through Volunteer MBC, and we can help you determine whether you're eligible or not and save you some time. Now, who's not eligible? There's a whole list, but I've shortened it down to essentially quasi-government organizations, those that encompass MUSH, municipalities, universities, schools, hospitals, anyone who's unincorporated, right? So if it's just like a grassroots initiative, it's not registered, it's not eligible as per the standards of the funder. And of course, anyone outside of Ontario is definitely not eligible because the provincial grant. In terms of required documents, so this is where things do get a little challenging because the fund is being administered through the Ontario Trillium Foundation. And as a past grant review team member of the Ontario Trillium Foundation, I can tell you that the requirements have just gotten more and more strict. It seems to be more challenging today to apply for a grant than it was, say, a few years ago. And so the first thing you have to do is ensure that your organization has at least 3 board members with active terms. So they're very specific when you apply that the terms have to be active and you must give start and end dates. At least 50% of the board has to be arm's length. So let's say, there's a number of board members and there's a husband and wife pair, right? They're obviously not arm's length because they're married. So what you have to ensure is that that ratio, husband and wife, is less than 50%. If there's 3 board members and the husband and wife are they make up a third and a third, so 2/3, that wouldn't work. You actually have to make a change before you apply. Somebody has to step off the board, somebody has to step on. Make sure you're aware of this because people do get declined for little things like this. Financials, another one that can be a challenge. So it's not just about providing your most recent financials, but they have to be, in many cases, depending on your revenue, it has to be financials that have been completed by a licensed public accountant. So please make sure you read through this section. This is the part where I do recommend that folks open the guidelines and actually go through what they've written there, and we can provide that to you if you need. But essentially, 2019 financials are required if your fiscal year is December 31st year end or anything April 1st to December 31st. And 2020 statements are required if your fiscal year is January to March. So if you think about that, the reason for that timing is because if your fiscal year just ended, in the last month, 2 months, 3 months, they're going to just ask for last year's statement. But if your fiscal year is going to end today, April 1st, or any time until the end of this year, they're assuming you couldn't have your 2020 done yet. How's that possible, right? So they're going to ask for your 2019. So surplus and deficit, this is something that generally the Ontario Trillium Foundation doesn't like. So I believe their surplus policy is a certain number of months of operating revenue is all you can have. I believe it's 6 months, but it could have changed recently. And so that surplus, 6 months of operating revenue, if you have more than that, you have to explain. Maybe you're saving the money to build a trail or for an after-school program. You just need to identify that. Deficits are definitely not supported and they're not recommended. If you have one, you have to provide a deficit reduction policy, and that has to be well written, explaining why you're in deficit and what do you plan to do to get out of deficit. So you must have at least 1 year of financial history. This means actually receiving revenues and actually having that documented on your books. So for instance, we get calls all the time from organizations that just started. Oh, we just started last fall. We just started last summer. You don't have a year of financial history in that case if you just started. And so those types of groups may not be eligible, but I know many of the groups on the call today are quite established and have financial history. So as long as it's 1 year of financial history from your incorporation date, you're fine. Financial statements must be board approved. Again, one of those little things that I've seen happen to people where they didn't have their board approve and sign off on the statements. That makes you ineligible. So make sure that your financial statements are signed by your board member, board chair as well, and ideally the treasurer. So just yesterday, the cycle opened. You can now go on the Ontario Trillium Foundation's new website and you can find the application form. The questions were already provided, and so you can see those and start thinking through them. The deadline is April 28th, very soon. You have less than a month now to apply, and that's going to be a big submission. They're using a new website as well. So, don't leave it till last minute. Things are probably going to crash. Interestingly, 6 or 12-month terms is what they're offering here. So you can either apply for 6 or 12. This is very different from what funders like the Ontario Trillium Foundation usually provide, which is a range of something like up to 12 months, or at one point there was a grant that was allowing you to do 3, 6, 9, 12. You can either apply for 6 or 12. That's it. In terms of funds, you can only apply for 80% of your eligible operating expenses. That's the max. So let's say last year your operating expenses were 100,000. You can apply for up to 80,000, but there's more limitations to that. I'll explain in just a second. Indigenous communities can actually apply for up to 100% of their expenses. And in terms of a request amount, minimum 10,000, maximum 250, but hang on, because there's additional restrictions in there. It's really all based on your budget, right? So if you look at this slide in blue, right, because there's a lot of writing here, but what it really says is if your operating budget is over $1 million, then you can apply for up to 250,000. If your operating budget is $500,000 to $1 million, or stated differently, if your operating budget is less than $1 million but more than 500,000, then you can apply up to 100. So some of the groups on this call will be in that range. And then organizations with less than 500,000 of a budget, so 4, 3, 2, 100,000, you can apply for up to 50, which is still great, but it is a little bit restrictive, which is a bit unfortunate. So if you have questions about this sort of thing, please do reach out, because we want to make sure there's no confusion. They've announced that it's 10,000 to 250,000 of funding, but the reality is that most groups will only be able to apply for up to 50 or up to 100. In terms of quotes, you are required to submit 2 or more competitive quotes, and those are quotes for goods or services valued at above 10,000. So let's say you have multiple services. Well, when you add them up together, the total should not exceed, the total should not exceed 10,000. And if it does, then you need a quote. If it does not exceed 10,000, then you don't even need a quote, which is great. But note 2 or more competitive quotes. So let's say, I'm purchasing a bunch of sports equipment and supplies, and it's 5,000 and 5,000. So now it equals 10,000. Well, now I need 2 or more competitive quotes. So in terms of project eligibility, you must either be transforming operations to meet public health requirements, or maintain viability to operate your facilities or deliver your programs in the short and medium term, right? So transforming operations, means you're really changing how you do business. Maybe you're putting in barriers. Maybe you're changing the entire structure of your sports club. Maintaining viability to operate your facilities. Perhaps you operate a gallery, and now you need to modify how the gallery is run and how the visitor experience is so that you can continue to operate. Ensure sustainability to operate facilities and or deliver experiences. So things that you're doing to make sure that your organization continues to be able to operate and run your programs for the long term, right? Perhaps you're working on a model of how you can change your revenue generation or how you could change your service delivery within these social distancing restrictions, right? Adapt to new ways of working. Perhaps you've gone all digital. Meet the changing needs of program and service delivery. Again, along the same lines, COVID has happened. People are still nervous. You still need to social distance and isolate. So how can you use this grant to make those changes? How can you use this grant to ensure that your organization continues to provide service and experiences? That's what the funder is providing funding for, and that's what you need to ensure. If you don't meet one of these bullets, you may not be able to apply. And then enhance visitor and participant experiences. Maybe you want to put VR goggles on your participants and have them, be able to experience sort of virtual reality or something. There are different things you can do, and they've left it vague on purpose. They want all sorts of projects to be submitted. In terms of costs, it's great to see that salaries are eligible. This is rare these days, but salaries, benefits are eligible. Innovation and virtual, so many folks are going virtual in their program delivery. And so those costs will be included as part of this grant. And that's pretty broad and pretty vague. And that includes vendors as well and getting them to develop technology innovations. Your rent and your lease for your office, your programming, as long as it's related to this grant and this work, it's eligible, which is awesome. Equipment, programming equipment, how to adapt to the new social distancing requirements, maybe PPE, maybe changing technology. I mentioned virtual reality, for example. Some organizations may choose to go that route. And then operating costs such as utilities, telephone communications. So what's not eligible? Any costs that are incurred before the approval of this application. And there is a window of time for approval. It is a certain number of months, but they were a little vague about that when I attended their webinar. They didn't actually have a firm date yet as to when the grant would be approved, but you can expect at least 3 months. Any expenses that are not directly paid by your organization, so somebody else pays them, you can't ask for that as part of this grant. HST or any refundable expenses, many charities are HST exempt, and other refundable expenses are not to be included in your budget. And any legal costs, insurance, audit costs, they just don't want to be liable for that, so they've excluded that, unfortunately. Here's a few other things. I don't think most people would be asking for this, but translation services is an interesting one. I was surprised to see that they actually excluded that. This isn't the grant to apply for capital assets. That should be the capital grant that's coming later this year. And any existing deficits are not eligible, along with if anybody else is paying for an aspect of your program, you can't ask this grant to fund it. That's already being covered, including another funder. If you've confirmed funding from another funder, this grant will not fund it. Just very briefly, questions include, tell us about the significance of your organization, in all these different areas before COVID. So paint us a picture of what life was like before COVID and prove to us that your work is actually important within the context of all these different categories that the ministry has decided to support. Tell us about your organization's purpose and how your programming really benefits people, right? And specifically people experiencing barriers. So there's a number of barriers on the screen there. They want you to speak to those barriers, address it. This is your chance to talk about why your work is so important and critical. Has COVID-19 had an impact on your organization's ability to do a million things? Deliver on mission, operate your facility, deliver your programs, meet payroll. So they want you to check those off. And then they ask, based on those impacts, tell us how. How did COVID impact your ability to operate or deliver experiences? Please select the outcome you wish to achieve. So remember those bullet points we talked about? Those are outcomes. You have to select at least one. And then they ask, what is your strategy to achieve the outcomes you selected? Do not select all the outcomes. This is a big mistake that people make on grants like this. Really select one or two. That's about it, in my opinion. And have a good strategy to identify that. How many months of operations is your organization currently able to sustain? Be careful. Do not tell them that you're able to sustain 12 or more months if you're asking for a grant of 6 or 12 months, because if you're able to sustain the operations, why would you need the funding, right? So you want to answer these questions with a little bit of carefulness, ensuring that you're actually painting the picture that the situation is bad and your organization needs help. So I wouldn't select 12 or more months at all. And if you're asking for a 6-month grant, maybe don't say that your organization can sustain 7+ months, because why would you need a grant in that case? With this funding, how many months will your organization be able to sustain? And so it asks you that question, I believe twice. And what they're getting at is, if you don't need the help, like self-identify that, and then they'll probably exclude you from the grant if you answer in a way that makes it look like you can take care of your own needs. So your grant request also has to align with the following. You're identifying impacts through COVID. You're aligning with the outcomes, those bullets that I mentioned. Your request has to align with your organization's eligible operating expenses. Remember those limits? If you're under $500,000, if you're $500,000 to $1 million, if you're $1 million plus, you have to align. And then there was the secondary restriction that you can only ask for up to 80% of your budget. And your financial workbook only includes eligible expenses. So obviously, please do not include the ineligible expenses. If you even include one, that's it. They don't come back and say, hey, you made a mistake. No, it gets declined at that point. So 20% of scoring is based on your significance within these sectors. So you have to have a significant presence. And you have to be operating a facility that's used, in sports and recreation. It has to be used for physical activity and actual physical experiences. 10% is based on diversity and underrepresented populations. So you need to speak to how your organization's purpose really impacts people facing barriers. And you know those barriers, you know the work you do, so you really need to tell that story. That's 10% of the score. Very heavy, 35% is about COVID. So you have to talk about the impact of your organization and elaborate on their ability to operate facilities and deliver experiences and how that's been impacted. Another 35% is about viability. So based on the impacts that you've identified, how will your organization continue to survive and operate facilities and deliver experiences in the short term and the long term? Please don't underestimate this. This is a significant part of the scoring. It's about the viability of your organization to use these government funds to actually impact the outcomes that you've selected and to remain viable. So my biggest key for success is to apply early. Please don't wait until deadlines. Word limits are extremely small. This is a little unfortunate, but they've kept things really, really tight. And so, you have to keep everything short and to the point. Documentation is essential. Don't underestimate the fact that your financial statements have to be signed or the board information has to be accurate. The terms have to be accurate. They take this very seriously. And, I would say get started today. Like the more organized you can be, the better. So at this point, what I'll do is I'll just suggest that you reach out to Volunteer MBC. They are your go-to place, for everything as members, and we're collaborating together on this. And so if you do have a project idea, please submit it to Volunteer MBC. They'll reach out to me, and certainly if you need our services, please ask through your representative at the center. And we do free phone consults. That's always been a thing. We want to make it easy to access information. And so you can always just email. I would say instead of emailing us, maybe email your key contact at VMBC first, just so that they're aware that this presentation has been helpful and that this service and this collaboration has been helpful. I think that feedback would be excellent for staff, and then we'll be in touch. And at this point, I think I'll open it up to any questions. I'm just going to take a quick pause, and maybe we can do any questions. You can feel free to enter that into the chat or to actually come on board onto the video and audio options there. But for those of you who have limited time, I do want to thank you for taking the time to be part of this today. I think it was hopefully it was something that everybody found very helpful, and this is what we try to do as Volunteer MBC and its collaborators. We try and provide you with additional support and access to information to make it easier to do what you do. So I'll just take a quick second, and then we'll open it to questions.
So I think you could
for that. Go on, Corinne, please.
I was just going to say, please don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat, or I see some hands being raised. That's great as well. Yeah, Rohit will be happy to take your questions, right?
Right.
Yeah. All right. Well, Linda, you have a question, so you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. And thank you for the presentation, really enlightening. I just wanted to know, is there yet, in terms of, so that we know for our own planning, is there a turnaround time? I know when the application is due. When can we expect to hear back so that we can line our ducks up, so to speak?
Yeah, I would say give it 3 months.
Okay.
And the reason why is because that's pretty traditional with Trillium, as we've observed over the last year and a half. Some organizations are still waiting to hear back from the December 9th submission, where they said they would get back to us by March 31st. And, we've received a few calls that the grants we wrote won, but there are folks still waiting. And, it's a little challenging to see that there isn't a clear response from them. Even on the webinar, people asked this question and I saw them kind of going, so they'll announce a date, but they don't know yet. And my best guess is 3 months. It could even be longer, unfortunately.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that.
All right, we have another question from Anna.
Hi, Rohit. Question. So you mentioned you shouldn't apply for you shouldn't ask for funding in this application that you're getting funding from another funder. If you've applied for funding from another funder, but you don't know if you've gotten it yet or not, how does that work?
Yeah, that's tough because it's pending, right? Depending on how their budget is laid out, and I haven't gone into their budget yet, but I'm assuming they're only asking you for what you want from OTF. So they're going to say, tell us what information you want from us. What they don't often say is, who else are you talking to? So I would tread this line very carefully. What I would do is I would let them know, hey, we need money for X, Y, and Z, but we do not have any other confirmed funders, right? And you just leave it at that. And if one of your proposed funding sources comes through, and then if this grant comes through as well, unfortunately, what you have to do is you have to reach out to the foundation and tell them, by the way, we actually, reached out to the building, BCAH funding, and it came through. And now we actually have some additional funds. At that point, you have to actually negotiate with funders like Trillium and say, we've received this source of funding now. What do we do? And what they'll do is they'll reduce the scope of your grant so that, let's say that 10,000 you got from somewhere else, it's maybe deducted from the submission you have here.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not very good at, other funders are very good at asking you, who else have you submitted requests to, and is it pending or confirmed? This funder doesn't do a very good job at that, so it creates some uncertainty around the question you asked, which is sort of, what do we do if we do receive pending funding, right? And the answer is, well, there may not be a clear way to indicate that here, but of course we don't know until we've seen the budget. They could have added that section to the budget, but I don't think they did.
Okay, thank you.
All right, do we have any other questions for Rohit today?
Yeah, and if you don't have audio, feel free to enter it into the chat.
Sorry, Rohit, I just wanted to question, a number of the organizations on the call typically would not have, be the typical sports organization or Parks and Rec, but if there's an organization and they have, culturally related programming, or, I see Michael on the line, maybe, where there's an activity to engage kids, and it very much relates to activity and sports, would they be able to apply?
I mean, there are some restrictions around which kinds of organizations can apply for funding. So on the arts and culture side, certainly if you're presenting a let's say cultural festival or event or experience, definitely. On the sports side, I want to go back to something that I mentioned earlier, which is that sports applicants and organizations that are kind of connected to sport, they have to actually be operating a facility. And this is a little bit of a restriction, because what it means is that amateur sports groups that just kind of get together and meet in the park are not eligible. And so what I'm going to try and do is, let me see if I can pull this slide up again.
But if an organization has an existing facility, where they typically run their youth programming out of, and that happens to relate to sports, then they do have a facility, right?
Yeah. So in that case, see the second bullet there. organizations with significant presence in the sport and recreation sector must operate a facility. And it has to actually be used for physical activity and delivering physical activity experiences and programs. So if I'm kind of understanding your question correctly, you're sort of asking, what if they don't operate a facility, but they still do physical activity and sort of programming?
No, like I was just saying, if they're typically not like a sports organization, right? If it's the boys and girls, and but they definitely run programs that are related to that.
Yeah, in that case, they would apply, and they would be eligible, because what they're doing is, even if it's not like a cricket club or a tennis club or a aquatic club,
right,
they're still operating a facility that's used for physical activity and physical experiences. So definitely, the Boys and Girls Club would, in my interpretation, they would be eligible, because regardless of what the sort of title is of the organization or what their mission is, the fact that they do support this particular sector and that they are significant in that sector means that they would probably score very high in this area.
Right, right. And then similar to like a seniors organization or senior center that definitely have a facility where they normally run activities that, keep seniors active under normal circumstances, I would assume they would be able to apply too, right?
Yeah, and we can assume that as well. But one thing with OTF that I've learned over the years is that they constantly change interpretation of things. So without getting into specific examples, last year they released the Resilient Communities Fund, and we found that even from round 1 to round 2, they changed their interpretation of things to the point where if you had the insider information, you would be more successful in your application. If you didn't, they would just say, well, this is our interpretation. And you would say, well, how do we know that? So the key is get on a call. So they do these 15-minute coaching calls. Everybody is eligible for them. We do these with all of our clients. Get on a call with them. Let them know we're a seniors organization. Although we don't call ourselves a sport organization, the healthy and active living programs we do, or the aquatic sort of aquafit program that we do, does that count under this grant? Would we score high in this area of significance of organization in sport and recreation? And the program manager will tell you yes or no. And you should take notes and you should hold them to that. So what they say there, note it, hold them to it, because what we see sometimes is a little bit of unfairness where organizations think that they belong under sport and recreation, they apply, and then they're told, oh, sorry, you're not a great fit. So in order to correct that issue, what you do is you speak to somebody from the foundation, you get their sort of, I wouldn't call it approval, but you get their support or their direction or their guidance, you document it, you apply, and then hopefully you get approved. And for those groups that don't get approved, you always need to go back and ask for a rationale for a decline. If you find out that the rationale for the decline was the same thing that you called the program manager for, I've seen this happen, right? And so I think all of us need to take that extra due diligence to reach out to the foundation in advance and clarify this stuff. It's not that clear.
That's a really good point, Rohit. I find that those coaching calls are extremely helpful, and I think DoGood Fundraising has definitely helped even Volunteer in BC realize how important those calls are. So it's on a scale of 1 to 10, I think it would definitely be a 10 as far as making sure you take advantage of that, right?
Absolutely.
Does anyone else have any questions that relate to the budget, or any questions around whether you think you might qualify with a program that you have and that you would like funding for? So one of the other questions I had, Rohit, was because this is funding to support your operations. So if your overall operation is doing okay, but you have not been able to run this program because there's no funding for it, and there's like to cover the operational aspect of this program, would that qualify? Because you would probably score low if it's the funding is looked at, or your operational budget is looked at for the whole operation, right?
Yeah, and I would say as long as it's arts, culture, recreation, heritage, tourism, sport, as long as you fall into that, even if you haven't been able to run the program for the past year because of restrictions, as long as that's something you do as an organization and it's clear somewhere in your application that, you, for example, you run tennis coaching and training sessions. And even though you haven't been able to do that maybe in the last few months or the past year, as long as it is something you do and you can demonstrate it, and you can really do a great job answering that question about how COVID has impacted your ability to run these training sessions and coaching, and you can really state, how having this support would be significant for you to continue to play a key role within that subsector. You have to make the case for it, right? And their assessment, the staff will initially assess and say, okay, they've gotten a score of, let's say over 50%, for example. Let's put them through. And then the community board or the jury, folks like me, who I did this for a number of years, will then read your application and we'll look for whether you've truly been able to indicate that impact. Have you had an impact previously? Do you need these funds to have that impact again? Has COVID impacted you significantly? And we're going to rank, and we rank from, you can get 100% score down to whatever. And at a certain point, they draw a line, and those organizations under the line, they're declined. And everybody over the line, it's not that you're accepted, but some of those applications are debated, and then it's mostly acceptance. So the higher your score is on those answers, remember the answers I said 10%, 20%, 35%, the higher you score, the more likely that you get approved. So if you need to put your attention somewhere, really put it into those questions, creating top-notch answers. We do this professionally. This is what I do for a living. And so we can help get you there to the point where you've written such a convincing application that they can't say no. It scores so high that nobody can deny that, your work is important. So I hope that answers the question.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Anything burning in the back of your minds? So I think, make sure that you put the right amount of effort in those crucial questions. Really looking at the scores is really important. Taking advantage of the coaching, and also, that Rohit and his team are available if you do need help with your application. Anything else? Yeah. Okay.
Cool.
Appreciate the opportunity to VNBC to be able to present this to everyone. Thank you so much, and thanks to everyone who came out today.
Thank you, Rohit.
Thank you.
And, I really, really appreciate it. It was great information.
Yeah, truly so valuable information to provide to all these organizations. It's, we all need something to carry us forward, so this is definitely going to help. So now to move on just going over some upcoming things that we have to highlight to everyone. So very recently, and this coming month, we have National Volunteer Week. So it's going to be on April 18th to 24th to recognize the power of volunteers and their contributions during a very tumultuous year. And this year's theme revolves around the value of one, the power of many, to showcase the magic that happens when people come together to work towards a common purpose. So the Volunteer Canada has put out different resources to help you sort of publicize this, thank your volunteers, recognize them. And there's also a toolkit available under Volunteer Canada's webpage. So you can definitely check that out. I'm going to be sharing the link in the chat as well. So hopefully that is helpful to you. And lastly, we will also be holding a forum for National Youth Volunteer Week, showcasing the power of many to all of you organizations to support the efforts of what you are doing with volunteers and showcasing how we can better support you and show you how to recognize your volunteers, how to drive your volunteers, and create meaningful engagement. So that'll be Thursday, April 15th at 12 p.m. to 1 p.m. So definitely join us. I'm going to share the link in the chat right now. So yeah, please be there. It's a very informative session. It'll be good to recognize your volunteers, especially during that week. So that is all we have today. Thank you everyone for joining. We hope you got a lot from this session. Again, thank you Rohit for such a valuable, informative presentation. And I hope that everyone has a good weekend. It's a long weekend, so enjoy it. And please reach out to us. Please reach out to Rohit if there is anything else. And we look forward to hearing from you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, and the same to all of you.